Dive deeper into mixing and the concepts around setting up and building a good mix, I think it's very important that we take a moment to talk about gain staging. And of course, first and foremost, understanding what our meters are telling us so that we can apply good gain staging practice to it. Now, when you look at a meter in Ableton, let's say when I play it here, you should notice two things. One, there's a light green and then a dark green section of the meter. The light green section is metering in RMS, also known as root mean squared. And then the dark green portion here, that's your peak metering. So it's important to note the difference between those two. The RMS is an average metering volume units across the track based on decibels, standard measurement of loudness. This dark green section here are the momentary peaks that pop through there. Originally, tracks were considered to sound better when they were louder. This was pre-streaming services, and a lot of mastering engineers were tasked with trying to make the track the loudest it could possibly be. Most often what they would do is apply a limiter or heavy compression to the mix. As a result, would take out dynamic range of the track. There wouldn't be a lot of nice, healthy waveform activity going on. It'd kind of be a big flat blob, and that would just maximize the volume of your track throughout. However, as a result, it would lose any richness of the dynamics of the track, and the music really would suffer. Subsequently, a new technology was developed that was called Luffs. Now, Luff's metering is fascinating because it takes into account the way the human ear actually hears. So there's a much more organic concept at play here. Luff stands for loudness units relative to full scale. And it's become a standard way of measuring audio units that blends the perceived loudness of the human hearing and the true intensity of an audio signal together. For example, when there's more mid-range, there's going to tend to be higher Luffs, but when there's a lot more bass and less mid-range, there might be a lower Luffs, even though it might be at the same RMS or peak metering. Things to take into consideration as we're building a mix and how it's going to factor out against the Luffs metering, because Luffs is what the services all look for when they're creating final master using their algorithm, because they're going to do something called normalizing. You're going to normalize those highest peaks to a certain maximum Luffs value that will make everything smooth across the board in terms of transitions. So from one song to the next, you hopefully have a pleasing listening experience, and there isn't this competition of trying to make one mix louder than the other. Luffs are incredibly useful creating a standard. And while different audio applications will require standards across the Luff scale, you can depend on most audio outlets to undergo some sort of normalization process where it's going to take that peak and bring it up. That normalization simply makes it easy for different pieces of audio to have the same average level throughout. Again, what's the difference between Luffs and RMS? So Luffs is definitely now the standard, but they're not the only units out there. Like Ableton is not measuring in Luffs, they are measuring in RMS and peak metering, and it's really important to understand the difference between RMS and peak metering versus Luffs. So unlike true peak measurements, RMS reads the consistent volume of audio output. So it's that consistent average volume, much like Luffs will do, but it doesn't take into consideration the anomalies of the human ear. I mentioned earlier, factoring in the way the human ear hears and how it discerns certain frequencies, or what it, I guess, gives preference to, I think would be a really good way to say it. RMS measures the average volume of a section or the entire duration of a clip, whereas Luffs has several different ways of measuring. We'll take a look at that on a few different meters here. I've got two different meters actually that I put on these. I really do like this Insight meter, but you'll notice here there's a short-term, integrated, and momentary. This is the WLM meter by waves. This is great. It does the same thing. It gives you a short term, a long term, and then it also gives you a dynamic range metering here. And here you'll notice the momentary as well as the true peak. So giving you a lot of great information here. You can see that my long-term average here is neg 20 as well as my short-term. But my true peaks you can see are bouncing around down here between negative 15 and maybe negative 8. So what am I looking for here? What's ideal and where do I want to start building up? And how do I translate these RMS meters here to my Luff meters over here? Well, the good news is it's being done for you. And that enables me then to kind of set some standards that I'm going to work with in my Luffs and true peak metering, begin to build and craft my mix with and design my gain staging around. That being said, we want to note that different streaming services do have different targets. Spotify, being the largest streaming service, is the one I generally average to, and they recommend delivering a Luffs metering of negative 14. So here, for example, if I were to go over to my Insight, I have plenty of headroom to build now. I'm at negative 20 here. So that means I've got 6 Luffs to go to get to negative 14. True peaks can range from negative 1 to negative 3, that Luff's varying anywhere from negative 14 to negative 12. Apple Music is at negative 16. YouTube ranges from negative 13 to negative 15. Deezer, negative 14 to negative 16. CDs are probably the hottest because they stand on their own and aren't matched up by an algorithm and generally are delivered at about negative 9. I do recommend separate master bounces for CDs versus streaming services. SoundCloud, it's important to note, they range much hotter as well, anywhere from negative 8 to negative 13. When you look at a Luffs meter, you're going to see these different values here, basic lowdown on the different types of Luffs so that you can properly understand loudness meters are these 3 elements of integrated Luffs, which is my average, this is what I'm targeting, the short-term Luffs that's analyzing the shorter bursts of audio rather than the full integrated average like the RMS, and then these momentary Luffs, those short-term measurements, the Luffs, give you kind of an assessment, snapshot that helps provide an accurate Luffs reading for individual moments in the tracks. Hopefully all of that makes sense and that you can start to begin using these meters to build your mix and create a nice foundation to work with good dynamic range as well as continuity from one session to the next in terms of how you build them.